Good evening. Good evening. We've got a small group, but a great group. Thank you all for being here. My name is Stephen Canetto, Associate Dean for the University Libraries. I want to welcome you to the library and to this program. I know that you're going to enjoy tonight's program. We had the opportunity a couple of months ago actually, to talk with Craig Ray and hear about his experience and talk with him first about Visit Mississippi, which is his current role in Mississippi. And then he was able to share some of his experiences as a special assistant to the president and a part of the advancement team. And that was fascinating to me and certainly Sarah and Dean Coleman. And we thought it would be a great opportunity to bring him here to talk about those experiences. I know that you're going to enjoy the program. Certainly want to thank all of you for being here today. Certainly if we can do anything to help you as you go throughout the evening. After the program, we will have a reception that we'd love for you to stay and talk and visit with Mr. Ray. And certainly want you to take an opportunity to look at some of the items that he has brought from his house. He was telling us earlier that this is the first time that these items have actually been out of the house. So it's a great honor and a pleasure for him to be able to bring these out and let us see them and experience them. Craig, thank you so much for being here. I know that everybody's going to be very excited to hear your presentation and learn all about your experiences as a part of the advancement team. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Sarah McCullough. She is our Director of Cultural Heritage Projects, and she is the inspiration for bringing Craig here and is a close friend of Craig's. And she is going to actually formally introduce him. So, Sarah.
We're very fortunate tonight to have the opportunity to hear Craig Ray. As Stephen mentioned, Mr. Ray is currently the Director of Visit Mississippi, the state tourism agency, and in that capacity he has overseen numerous wonderful projects for the state of Mississippi, such as implementation of the Mississippi Blues Trail, which began under the administration of Haley Barbour. And he also was instrumental in developing a partnership with the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles, which helped promote certainly Mississippi's wonderful music legacy as well as other aspects of our cultural heritage. He is going to talk to us tonight, however, about his previous position. As Stephen mentioned, I got to know Craig when I actually was working for the Division of Tourism during his first tenure under Barbour's administration as Director of Tourism. And inevitably, we all in conversation bring up experiences we had in a previous job. And I would notice that Craig, in a very quiet, very humble way, would mention a story, but it would be about being in Hong Kong with George Bush or meeting Vladimir Putin or Tony Blair, and stories that were a little bit outside the norm. He belongs to that very small club of people who have served on presidential advance teams, meaning, of course, that he would go into a country well in advance of a president's visit. And as Deputy Director of Advancement for Special Events, he would ensure that all logistics were in place for the president and for special events related to his visit. So we are very fortunate tonight to have the opportunity to hear some stories that very few people get to hear. So thank you for sharing those with us tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all for having me. This is one of my first opportunities to share some of my stories this evening in my long career, dating back to 1984. And so I thought what I would do this evening, as mentioned, I haven't had a chance to refer to my Wall of Fame and my own museum at home before, but I have a couple stories that I'd like to share just to kind of frame up my career and some of the events leading up to the 9/11 story that many of us have our own story and our own remembering of that time. So I'd like to go back and began where I, as some of you all phrase it, I went to the school up north. I came from the north. I was born in southern Illinois, in Springfield, Illinois, land of Lincoln. And my family moved to Mississippi my senior year in high school. So I was a northerner, became a southerner, and then I went to Ole Miss all in my senior year in high school. And so I really dove into the college life at Ole Miss. We had a very active fraternity, very active in school politics. A lot of our fraternity brothers, I was Sigma Nu. I was in the Sigma Nu fraternity. I was president and vice president, which it was a military fraternity, so we were, I was commander and lieutenant commander of our fraternity. Also very active in politics, and at that time, there was a young Republican that was running against a very established senator, and the Republican's name was Haley Barbour. And I was a member of the College Republicans and a very active participant in our fraternity, and we supported the efforts of, at that time, Mr. Barbour running for Senate against a doomed race against John Stennis at the time, looking back. But that was other than my father running for state representative in southern Illinois, that was my first dabble into politics. And I really enjoyed the event planning, everything that goes on behind the scenes of a campaign and events. And my roommate, my sophomore year at Ole Miss, was very involved in politics. He was from Meridian, Mississippi, very active in state politics, and he had a job lined up after college. He was going to be state political director here in Mississippi, and was very well connected with Haley Barbour, with Sonny Montgomery, Haley was national Republican statesman, so we had, I'm trying to think all the different coordinates that we had there. Plus, Trent Lott was a Sigma Nu from Ole Miss, and he was always willing to help fraternity brothers get involved in politics if they chose to. So there was an open door for me, and I was offered a position on the Reagan-Bush campaign, 1984. I was a field rep in Mississippi. I had 26 counties. This was a re-election of President Reagan, very popular at the time, and I had 26 counties. And what was unique about that, not just that I was a field rep, but President Bush, Vice President Bush, First Lady Nancy Reagan, and First Lady Barbara Bush all came to Mississippi, and they all came to my counties. So I had the experience of meeting with the presidential advance teams, the Secret Service, the White House communications, all within my time frame. So I was given full exposure to incredible opportunities during that time. And my first story, and I had to share this one as I was writing my notes, I thought I've got to share this story. This was Natchez, Mississippi, and Vice President Bush was coming to Natchez. He was going to give a speech. To this day, if you've seen the gazebo on the river bluff outside of Dundee's Tavern that overlooks the bluff, there's a nice little gazebo where people have weddings and receptions, and Vice President Bush spoke from there, and we raised a crowd, had a nice little rally. And I was the local guy that helped raise the crowd and bring out the locals, but I got to hang out with the Secret Service and the White House communications, which I thought was pretty special. What was really cool on that trip was I was able to sit in my first big meeting with the group, and where we had a secure phone where we would talk to the White House and exchange notes. They'd go into the separate room, and the fax machine would send us a schedule. And remember the old fax machines where the paper would roll out into like a scroll, and that was the coolest thing. We'd have a conversation, and like 20 seconds later, the schedule would come to us all printed out. So the invention of the fax machine, still the cell phones, I'm not sure, we didn't have any cell phones at that time. So that was 1984. Also, within about 2 or 3 weeks from there, President Reagan came to Mississippi. He came to Mississippi Gulf Coast, to Gulfport, to Jones Park. Those are familiar. It's at the end of Highway 49 and 90 in Gulfport. And we were tasked with raising a crowd, wanted to do a big outdoor rally for the president. All the local politicians would be there, and would have the Mississippi Gulf Coast in the background, and just this wonderful rally. And we were tasked with raising around 10,000 people. So this time, the president's advance team flew in to the coast, and that was so cool to pick them up and have them be in charge and work with all the military and security for this huge outdoor event. Well, this is before social media, so we used phone banks to raise a crowd. If you remember what the phrase phone banks, flyers on vehicles. We'd put the flyers on all the, we'd go to the telephone poles and put up the signs, radio and TV and word of mouth. And we raised a crowd of over 10,000 people. And just getting the word out that President Reagan was coming was a big deal. Well, on that same note, I thought of another story that emerged from there that I remembered, and I see this when I go down to Mary Mahoney's, one of my favorite restaurants on the coast. On that same visit, we had a private reception fundraiser for President Reagan at, used to be the Broadwater. And we had a little private reception, and Mary Mahoney's catered it. Gumbo, Mary Mahoney's gumbo. President Reagan fell in love with, who he invited later to come up to the South Lawn for a reception and cater the reception with Mary Mahoney's gumbo from the coast. So if you ever see the pictures of Mary Mahoney and President Reagan, it was from that event where he had the gumbo for the first time. That's my tourism addition to that story. I just thought of that on the way up here. It all goes back to tourism, right, Mississippi. So that was a huge, very successful event, and that's where I really got to, as I said, you know, I think I want to do this. I think I want to go to the White House someday and do this. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I've got a path. And so, fast forwarding a couple years to 1988, I did go to President Reagan's inauguration in D.C., and I wasn't really pursuing a job at that time, but it was a wonderful experience. Well, 1988 rolls around, and many of my friends that went on to work for Vice President Bush were on his campaign team. So 1988, Vice President Bush is running for president with Senator Dan Quayle from Indiana, and they're putting together campaign teams. Happen to have my Sigma Nu connections all in place at the White House, and was offered an opportunity to serve on the campaign. At that time in my life, I really, moving to Mississippi, I had not traveled. I had not been to New York City. I had not been to LA. Had not been to, other than our beach, I'd never seen the ocean. I had been to Canada because our family crossed the border. We went on vacation in Michigan one time. But I just really hadn't traveled that much around the country. So immediately to be asked to be on a campaign team, within 2.5 months, I traveled to 25 states and put together all kinds of events around the country, from fundraisers to large crowds to fishing trips to musicals to barbecues. It was just campaigns, as you know, they're just a little bit everything. So that was a great experience, and was promised if we won that there would be a job for me in the administration. So that was my carrot. I got there. We won. And I was offered a job in the inauguration, and moving to D.C. for the inauguration, and hoping that would lead into a job in the administration. Well, during that time, I was, after the inauguration, if we can switch to the first slide, second slide, there you go, third slide, that's good, right there. I'm skipping a lot of cool stuff in between, but I'm just hitting the highlights on this evening, and I wanted to talk about President Bush. He had chosen for his first international trip, this would be February 1989, he had an existing friendship with Prime Minister Mulroney from Canada. And his first international trip, the Prime Minister invited him to come and visit for I would call it a friendly international trip for his first trip out of the country. Really no major issues that were resolved, some bilateral meetings and receptions. But at this time, during the our world of advance, you would always, this is when we could control the press. It wasn't 24-hour media or news yet. CNN had started, I think, 1990. So we literally could control what they got to see, what they could report. We would give them the photo of the day, press conference once a week, maybe a news media. So it was really a different world back then. So this was our photo of the trip, his first international photo. And of course, we staged it on the Prime Minister's grounds with the flag in the background. And we had our core of media that were with us, and they had their group of media, and they took some nice pictures and did some poolside interviews. Very, very simple, but it was the first photo. How did I get that photo? That's a whole nother story. The president's photographer that would travel with us would obviously have the best camera angles and have access to the best photos wherever we went to. And he would frame the pictures after each trip, whether they're international or local, and post them in the White House, in the West Wing, East Wing, old executive office building. If it was one of the trips we had, we would have photos in our office on those old wooden frames. So I was on the trip and I was given that photo. So that's from 1989, and just a handful of those that were produced. So that was the first international trip. Very simple, routine, a lot of fun, great experience. So go to the next slide. So the second international trip was his trip to China. We literally flew, the advance team, we flew from Canada to China. And while he went to China and like five other countries, but the main part of the trip was his trip to China. So there was an advance team that went over before us, but I was on the team that went to China. Now, former President Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, had also served as ambassador to China under President Nixon. So this was a special to him to not only start in Canada, but his second international trip that he wanted to make was to go back to Beijing, where he had lived and served as ambassador, and meet back with the Chinese government and all the embassy constituents. So our role was to, on international trips, this was my first, the Canadian trip was very easy, but for me to be thrown into, I had never been out of the country, so to go to Canada, which is pretty much like the United States, but to go abroad and to go to Beijing was a life-changing experience for me, but very enlightening. But you have such a huge team that travels with you and to support this. So we were given our orders for the trip. The president, had our scheduled meetings. We needed to meet with, our unilateral or bilateral meetings, some state dinner, some press conferences, meeting with some business leaders, the typical things that you would see a president in a foreign country check the box visit, other than the private meetings and for the business issues. So we had those list of items that the president had requested, but most of those were normal events, so nothing out of the ordinary. But the one thing he told us being the advance team and the Secret Service and our team, that he wanted a picture in front of the Forbidden City with Mao Zedong in the background. He had a famous photo when he was ambassador with he and Barbara Bush riding their bicycle through the square, innocent American tourists, and that was a photo. Of course, we couldn't do that, but his orders were, I want a photo, make it happen. So that's all we were there for 10 days, and we had to figure out how we could do that. So of course we negotiated with our Chinese counterparts from day one, saying, all right, we'll do this, this, and this, airport arrival, all the exchange, the pleasantries, the protocol at the airport, do everything we have to. But the one thing our president would like would be a photo across from Tiananmen Square, Forbidden City, this photo right here. Absolutely not too many people, 1 million people in the square. We can't secure it. There's no way we could handle this. You're not going to stop. You're not going to get this. So we, just like the Chinese water torture, each day we would just ask again, okay, we really, really want this photo. Now, we're going to get this photo, so we just say yes now because we're going to get it. No, it will not happen. So the more we thought about it, we said, you know what? The one thing the President of the United States does, can you all hear me? Okay. When we travel, even today, we bring our own limos. We bring our own backup cars. We bring our own, it's called Roadrunner, which is our own communications vehicle. And it's a little package that you see on TV that travels, like 4 or 5 cars. We bring them with us. Well, the drivers in those cars are our Secret Service agents. So, why don't we just stop the car in front and everyone else will stop? And so for those, I'm going to show my age, and for some of the younger folks in the crowd, we got to thinking about, all right, Animal House. Great scene in Animal House in the parade where they stopped the parade and they moved the people off the side of the road. You know, how can we do this? Well, we'll get the media that are traveling with the president at the airport. We'll move them ahead of time and move them to this spot right across the street. We put an X out in Tiananmen Square, literally just, y'all go there, we're going to stop here, you're going to get the photo, it'll be in Time Magazine, this is the photo of the whole trip. Just trust us, go there. So we had, some of my counterparts were there with the sunglasses on, and they're just planning this secret photo. And then we had people in the crowd that you can't see from here, you can see the Secret Service. And all we told the president was, when we get to this spot, you step out of the car, it has a little railing, just stand up, do the wave, and get right back inside. And there you go. It was right on the front of Time. Every magazine, headline, pictures, that was the photo. So that was, and the rest of the trip was very momentous. I think a month after we were there was the incident in Tiananmen Square, but we probably stirred up a lot of excitement and world activities while we were there, but this was the takeaway was this photo. In the same way, this photo came back to our office, and I was on the trip, so I made sure that I was able to add that to my museum. So that's a famous picture that you'll remember back in time. So that was a wonderful experience, and that was a very, very challenging trip to not just to do what we need to do, but insert what we need to do in a communist country. So now I'm going to really fast forward to 9/11. I'm going to go from working for George Herbert Walker Bush to being in the private sector to being asked to return and work on George W. Bush's campaign and then serve in the role that I did for him. So I don't think we need to fast forward it just yet. Just hold on to this frame. So tonight I'm going to tell my story of 9/11. And to frame this up, I thought it might be fun to think back. I'm going to say the event. You think about where you were, and then I'll give you the date. So if you think back, for those that were alive then, first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. Where were you and what was the date? I don't have any prizes, but if you know the date, I'll share that with you. If you remember where you were, it was July 20th, 1969. Anybody want to say where they were? Remember?
Quang Tri Combat Base, Republic of Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Saw Neil Armstrong step on the moon with a little black and white TV.
There you go.
6 miles from the demilitarized zone.
There you go. I was at a shopping mall in Wisconsin visiting cousins, but I do remember my mom saying, go look at that picture, you'll remember that forever. We were just, it's like a TV store with 10 different TVs up in the mall. Elvis Presley died. Who remembers where they were when you heard that Elvis Presley died? Got one?
Driving back home to Tupelo from a trip to the coast with my mother and sister. Where did y'all know the
I don't know how old it was, but we were in St. Louis visiting my grandmother, and a day or two after that, we drove back from Memphis and drove past Graceland and Saw all the people out front and all the flowers.
August 16th, 1977. President Ronald Reagan was shot. Who remembers where they were when that took place?
I'm gonna pass.
Okay, okay,
Somebody else.
okay. I was at Ole Miss coming back from a political science class to my dormitory, and I remember someone telling me on the way in that he had been shot, and we watched the news for the rest of the day. Anybody else remember where they were? For those that weren't born yet, I promise I have some. I have some. I have some newer.
Don't say those things.
I have some newer days. March 30th, 1981. Princess Diana of Wales. She died in a car crash. World news. For those that might remember that date was August 31st, 1997. And we sure saw a lot of that on the news for the next year, and really until even recently. Now here's one. Where were you when Mississippi State became #1 in football after they beat Auburn? And the date was October 12th, 2014. The Monday after the victory. AP poll was #1. So where were you on September 11th, 2001? I'm going to share my story where I was on September 11th, 2001. I'm sure that you all know where you were or know where you were following that day and that story. Again, that year I had accepted a position to serve in the George W. Bush administration as Special Assistant to the President and Deputy Director of Event Coordination. And the Presidential Advance Office, where I had worked before as an individual advance representative, where I would travel out and just do one trip at a time and just go to the next city and the next country. As a special assistant, I was in charge of all the trips, so there might be 15, 20 events at one time that we're juggling from one day to the next, and have as many as 100 different people scattered out throughout the United States and other countries. So I was truly the coordinator of all the events and did all the pre-advance travel, and then occasionally I would travel on Air Force One when my boss was not with him and handle all the in-town events. So it was a 90-hour-a-week job, a lot of energy, a lot of fun. But right into my third month that I was there, leading into the fall of September 11th. We had every president up to that time had gone to the United Nations every year to New York City to give a speech. That was the world meeting of the UN, and all the world leaders would have their time slot to give their remarks and address to the world. And so the White House treated that trip as a foreign trip. You were going to New York City and you would meet with all kinds of foreign leaders. You would give your remarks. You would have bilaterals, unilaterals, social events. It was a full 3 or 4 day schedule, but it took a lot of planning, and it was treated as a foreign trip. So I was assigned to go on this trip, and we would fly on our pre-advance trips. We would take either the Vice President's plane, the Secretary of State's plane, or another military plane, regardless where we would go. On this particular trip, it was a lot easier to just take the train from D.C. into New York City, save some money, and easy to get in and out a lot quicker. So we had our team that we all took the train up to D.C. And on a pre-advance trip of this nature, we had the President's Deputy Chief of Staff. So he was the senior leader of the trip that would give the approval or disapproval of the schedule and all the activities. You had the advance office, which was myself and another person from my office that we were ultimately would direct and produce the event that was orchestrated on that pre-advance trip. The Secret Service, not only from in the President's detail, but the local, New York field office is the largest Secret Service office in the world, and so they would be there to support our efforts too. White House Communications would provide all the communications for us on that trip, and then when the President would come back. Military office would support, they represent Air Force One, all the backup planes, all the military assets, transport of the limos and all the vehicles, helicopters, they handle all of that part of the umbrella. Then you have the National Security Council. Remember that phrase as the story goes forward. They have about usually 4 or 5 reps that on an everyday basis, wherever the President goes, are with him to advise him on national security issues. That at his fingertips, they give him the information that he needs, or that they can be that quarterback for him with that information. Then the military aid would travel with us on trips like this, and military aid, as everyone knows, carries the football, the briefcase that can launch military warfare if needed. He also needs to know the intimate movements of the President that he will share with his counterpart, his military aide, whichever one is traveling with him that day. So he has an important role. Then the press office travels with us. They would plan all the press movements, all the press locations, and start lining up the interviews and photography and that part of the planning. Then we would have a scheduler that would travel with us, that would design the schedule, the minute by minute what we're going to do, is they would design the overall program that we would further implement. And then the President's photographer would travel with us, and he would take pictures of everything we were doing and seeing while we're there to document what we might be taking later, but also to document the trip that we can for our planning purposes. So that's our team. We're all on a train headed to New York City to be there for 2 or 3 days of planning. So as we arrive at Penn Station, we are met by our local field office Secret Service team. They put together a mini motorcade for us. It's easier to move around New York City with armored vehicles and policemen. So we had a 3-vehicle motorcade for us just for the 3 days to move us around all the locations. So they pick us up, they take us to the Waldorf Astoria, my favorite hotel in New York City, and it stayed there many a time for George Herbert Walker Bush. George Herbert Walker Bush lived there as the UN ambassador for 3 years under President Nixon, and that became the UN ambassador at home. From that time, even today, the UN ambassador lives in Waldorf Astoria, and therefore the President would stay there as well. And we would use 3 or 4 floors for all our meetings and receptions. It was easier to secure. So we were staying at the Waldorf Astoria for that night. We were scheduled to meet for drinks, adult beverages, as we would say, at the Bull and the Bear, one of the coolest bars in New York City, also inside the Waldorf Astoria. And we were going to meet with Chief of Staff Anthony Carbonetti, cool name. He was Chief of Staff to Rudy Giuliani. Rudy had just been elected mayor, and big supporter of the President, was there to help us out as a local, everything we needed for the trip. Well, over drinks and then dinner that night, we just literally just talked New York politics, UN prep. Actually talked about our Deputy Chief of Staff was a fireman from Ohio. We talked about firefighters in New York City, and specifically talked about New York Fire Department Rescue Squad number 1. This happened to be in conversation. I just remember listening that evening. I didn't have a whole bunch to contribute that night, but to listen to the team. And so all this is happening, and at the time it's just an event. We're all looking at the schedule for the next day. But who would have thought from that night that Mayor Giuliani and his Chief of Staff would become such a big part of history after that evening, and that travel, security, our world communication, politics, and economy would change forever that next day. Next morning, we were scheduled to be at the United States Embassy across from UN headquarters at 8:45 a.m. We were scheduled to meet with the UN ambassador, talk to him about all the events that were going to take place at the UN, all the recommended meetings that he had, the pull-asides, the bilaterals, a lot of the diplomatic protocol, but to meet with him, have him and his team walk us through where we need to go, what we needed to do. The ambassador to be appointed, if you remember this name, Ambassador Negroponte, had not been appointed yet by the Senate, so they had an interim, he was a permanent rep to the UN, his name was James Cunningham, who we would be meeting with at 9 o'clock. So we loaded up our motorcade and moved from the Waldorf Astoria to the UN. A military time, in the South we say, if you're not early, you're late. And military time is always early, and that's the way that we rolled. And so we were there early. We got there at 8:30. We're in the holding room at the embassy until the ambassador was ready to meet with us. So we had the military aide go up and meet with his attaché, and when he was ready to meet with us, he would come down and pick us up. And we'd walk up to his office. So approximately 8:45, we were moving to the elevator, and the military aide has come down. As you recall, the first plane hit, I think it was 8:43. And he told us as we were getting into the elevator, he said, something strange has just happened. There's a plane, we think, that has hit one of the towers. And it's already on the TV in the ambassador's office. You'll see that, but we don't know what's happened. But we think a plane, might be a small plane, something's hit one of the towers. So instantly, that sure doesn't sound good. Didn't know what to think, but from that second, as we went to the elevator, and they had a secure phone in the ambassador's office, and we called the president. Okay. Now, if you recall, so we're in New York. Our team is planning a trip to the president for 2 weeks later. President Bush is in Sarasota, Florida. He's going to Booker Elementary School to give a No Child Left Behind address. So he's going to read to the kids first, and then give a press conference and update on the legislation. It was truly a photo op trip for him to check the box to have an event for the day outside of D.C. So this is rare that he makes the trip with a skeletal crew to Florida without an NSC advisor. 3 of those are with us, and the other, Condoleezza Rice and the Vice President, are at the White House. So he is without a national security advisor where he is, which was just supposed to be a day trip there and back to D.C. So our Deputy Chief of Staff calls, which you can, the limos have phones inside, secure phones. So we called the president at that moment and said, something's happened. One of the towers has been hit. We do not know, but from the embassy right across from the UN, from uptown, you can see downtown, you can see you can see far enough line of sight, and that something had hit. You can already see the smoke, and from our angle, plus we had a local TV network that was covering live. So as we're calling the president in the limo, saying something's up, we don't know. So he knew about it before he stepped into the classroom to talk to the kids. And then immediately as we were finishing up the phone call at 9:03, the second plane hit. We saw that happen and saw it on the TV screen. Immediately called Secretary Card, Chief of Staff Card, to tell the president. So if you remember the photo of him walking in and interrupting the classroom and telling the president, second plane's hit. Where something is up. Even at that moment, we still didn't exactly know, but we knew it wasn't a small plane on the first one. So that is happening. We see, at that point, you can just feel the embassy. It really goes into like a war mode. You find out our role, what we're doing with the embassy, shutting down. We feel that not only New York City's under attack, but possibly possibly the United States. And so at that point, we literally grab a secure phone from the office and take it with us. And we have our motorcade, so we planned ahead, so we have our motorcade outside. And our new role at that moment was to get our mission, we're still not sure what all was happening, was that we needed to get these 3 protectees to the president. That was our mission. So they take us to a police precinct in Manhattan to figure everything out. They need to get us to a secure area with the people that are with us. So they take us to a precinct. I'm going to show my age again. Who remembers Barney Miller? Great show. Precinct. You got the cells here. People come in and out. All kinds of things happening. We walk in. The sky's falling, and the local cops are arresting prostitutes and drug addicts and stuff. And they give us a prison cell. We walk in with our phone, and we're just hanging out, trying to figure out what's going to happen next. But their world is still happening there. But yet, the outside and the streets of Manhattan, you could feel that it was something had happened, and we were still trying to figure out what our role, where we're going from there. So, at this point in Florida, the president, they called for immediate press conference at the school. He gives his basically what they think has happened, and then he goes into evacuation mode. And from there, what happens is you really find out who's important, who's not, who gets to go on Air Force One with them. So they did not take the press. They took all the traveling staff that was with them in Secret Service and the military, and they boarded Air Force One and got up in the air. And at that point, we didn't know where they were other than they were traveling. We knew some coordinates where they would be. But you also have to remember the 2 cell towers in New York City were on top of the tower. The 2 cell towers were on top of the towers, and they were gone. So there's no cell coverage in the city. Literally no cell coverage. So that's why we were still at the precinct to establish some communication on what we could do and how we could get out. So at that moment, we figured out the only way that we could get these 3 protectees out would be to get them to Dover Air Force Base in Dover. At Dover Air Force Base, which is a couple-hour drive. But they had already closed down the city. The tunnels were closed. They'd already shut down all air traffic around the country. But we were tasked with getting these protectees to a plane in Dover. So as we, if you could move the next picture. So the plan is to, and before I tell this story, because I've got one other detail. While we're in the precinct, we're able to at least call back to the White House. We're able to make some phone calls from there using landlines. So I call back to my office because we're hearing that there might have been another plane that hit something in D.C. We weren't sure about the Pentagon. There was maybe another plane out there. There was some talk of maybe 2 or 3 more planes that were up in the air. So I called back to our office because my boss was with the president. I was in D.C. I had 2 people with me. So literally in our office, we had a handful of interns that were, our office was on the White House grounds in the old executive office building. And I called to check in with them, and of course it was just mayhem. And they said, Sea Ray, which is my nickname. Sea Ray, what do we do? I said, well, just listen to the Secret Service and listen to the evacuation plan. They said, there isn't one. They said, take off your shoes and run for your lives. And there was not an evacuation plan at the White House. There was for the Vice President and for Condoleezza Rice and other top security people there that would go into the bunker, but there was no plan for the other 400 employees of the old executive office building. But you find out at that point who the Secret Service protects. It's not the staff. It's not anybody else. It's the protectees, period. So that was for my team that was there. I said, well, than run for your lives. I said, go home and hunker down, and we'll check in with you in a couple of days. And so that, I said, but we're getting ready to get into a car, I won't be able to talk for like 2 hours. So we made our check-in calls, and then we loaded up, and as we're getting ready to load up, as a brave soul, I told my boss, I said, look, I know that we'll probably end up coming back here. I said, I'll stay behind at the Waldorf, and I'll have everything ready when you come back. No, you're going with us. You're going to Dover. I said, weren't the tunnels a target in 1993 when they attacked the World Trade Center? They were going to blow up the tunnels too? Yes, but we're going to the Lincoln Tunnel. I said, yes, sir. So we loaded up our motorcade. The local police and the New York policemen and Secret Service took us to the tunnel. We went on our way through the tunnel, and then the New Jersey police on the other side picked us up and escorted us onto Dover. So that was the longest ride through that tunnel, I think the longest couple minutes of my life. But as we popped out of the Lincoln Tunnel, we looked back at the second tower, it was completely fallen. And I was riding with the president's photographer, and he was in our vehicle. Now, we didn't have any cell coverage at that point, so he took this picture, which was a protected photo that wasn't released. And it was the only one that you'll ever see. And this was, you can imagine the only photos that you would see were from downtown, and the Lincoln, all the tunnels were closed, so there weren't people in that area taking a picture for us to have this particular one. So I've protected this over the years, but this is us coming out of Lincoln Tunnel and watching the second tower fall. And from there, as we moved, we would go, 30 minutes at a time, stop, use a landline. We'd stop at Highway Patrol headquarters all the way to Delaware until we finally could pick up cell coverage in a different network. That's how strong the towers were, or the cell towers were in the New York Trade Center, World Trade Center. So we get to Dover Air Force Base, and as we arrive, they're going into DEFCON 3. And they have a plane that's there. I think it was a G5 that had been escorted in for our protectees to go to the president, who's now in Kansas. He'd gone to Louisiana and then moved on to Kansas. So we had a coordinate they were going to go with them. And so at that point, we really found out who makes the cut, who does not. So there were 4 people that went onto the plane, and my boss had me be in charge of everybody else. So he said, so I want you to stay here on the base and just wait for orders. We don't know what's up. Just stay here where it's safe. And we'll call you. And just right now, that's how it was. Everything was literally up in the air, no pun intended. So they bid farewell, they take off, and the base commander turns around, looks at me and says, all right, son, here are your choices. He said, you can either stay here. I think, as I recall from my notes, he was at DEFCON 3, so we were going to 4. And he said, if you stay here, you'll be locked down for 2 to 3 weeks. Can't let you out. Or, no one really knows who you and the rest of the team are. We can put you at the Holiday Inn Express across the street, and we'll take care of you, and everything's taken care of. You just hang out there. That way, if it's something's up, then you can leave on your own to back to Washington, D.C. So we all thought that was a good idea. So we went to the Holiday Inn. At that point, it was myself. The president's photographer actually went on the plane with them, and so we had White House Communications, local Secret Service, my press advance, and the press officer, about 8 of us that stayed. So that night we stayed, and from the local bar there we watched the president come back to D.C. and make his speech from the Oval Office. So we were given the instructions to wait a day and then to come back to D.C. from there. So as we, really not knowing any of what was happening, as none of us really did at that point, but we were getting more details on what had happened and what we believed had happened as far as the planes, the two planes that hit the World Trade Center. You had the plane that hit the Pentagon, and you had the plane that landed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which they believe, the one that hit the Pentagon, that they believe was aiming for the White House and circled D.C. a couple times, and they couldn't get low enough to get to the White House, which is why they planted all those trees there for many, many years, so you couldn't see it, it would be visible. So that plane picked off the Pentagon, and the one that landed in Shanksville was going to the Capitol. So that's, whether folklore, those are the facts that I have. And there was also a part of that story on that particular plane. On each of the planes that struck their targets, the terrorists had one or two of their bouncers, military, stronger men that would be there to protect the cockpit and help them to execute their plan. The plane that went down in Shanksville did not have one. He was held up in customs in Orlando, Florida. So they went ahead with the plan without their muscle man for the trip, and that's, as they think, how the people that responded and said, let's roll, and were actively went up and fought with the terrorists and took the plane down because they were shorthanded on that particular plane. So from that point, we get back to D.C. and our role and our role from the advance team in planning for the president and what we're going to be doing for the next year would be recovery and planning. Obviously, the Pentagon, the site in Pennsylvania, the locals there, the New York City, what happened there, and so over the next year, we knew that there would be many trips back and forth. That's where we're immediately thinking in our minds. So we're back in September 14th. At this point, it's 3 days after the attack. The president hadn't been in New York City yet. So we planned for a day of prayer at the Washington National Cathedral. And we called upon our Reverend, the United States Reverend for many presidents, Reverend Billy Graham, to be there to lead the prayer service and to be with us in that, be with us, the United States in that moment where decisions were being made and prayers. So we immediately, our team, we had to send a team to New York and be ready there for the president going there later that day. We had to send a team to the Pentagon, Pennsylvania. So we never stopped working in our planning, but really to put together this event at the Washington National Cathedral. Well, I was assigned, which to this day has really touched my life, to be in charge of Billy Graham. And he was really starting to age at that time, but still very sharp and very powerful in his spiritual touch to the world, and for him to be able to be there that day was special. So I remember, as all the other VIPs and all the guests, and we had, as you do, you never have the president's whole administration or cabinet in one room at the same time. You always have one person in case something happens. You have somebody left to lead the country. So everybody but one, and I think it might have been I've been the Speaker of the House, I wasn't there. I'm trying to remember which person they had not to be there, but it was the place to be for that day. So the whole cabinet, all the VIPs, the Senate, the House were at the Washington National Cathedral in Georgetown. And I remember Billy Graham. I remember meeting him, and his son was with him, meeting them at his vehicle and escorting him to his seat. He could barely walk, and I remember being able to hold his hand. He's such a big gentleman, big hands, and just nice as he can be. And I really wasn't sure if he could even make it up the stairs to this podium and be able to deliver this very important remarks. Silly for me to judge that. So when it was his time to get his message, I remember he and myself and his son escorted him up to the stairs. If you've ever been to Washington Cathedral, it's this beautiful, immaculate church, and the pulpit is pretty high up. You have to walk up these marble stairs to get up to the top. And we got to the foot of the stairs, and Billy Graham's like, got up from here. And he just let go and walked up like he was 19 years old, and walked up the stairs and gave this incredible prayer and speech. And I have these words. I didn't have a picture. I didn't want to bring a cheesy Google photo, which I could have found, but I did remember his words and wrote down his famous line that we've seen so much that brings tears to our eyes and makes us all feel a sense of anger, that God can be trusted or trusted even when life seems at its darkest. And he gave this incredible speech and prayer and stepped down. He hit that last step, and he was back to the same self. It was like the magic just came through his hands and his voice, and it really set the tone for the decisions that were about to be made. And again, the president had not been to New York City yet. So after the service, we shifted into our advance gear again. We've got to get the president back to the White House to get him bring him on to get out to Andrews Air Force Base to fly to New York. We're in charge of all these other movements to get him to New York to visit Ground Zero. He wanted to go down, help and be there with the firemen, be with the local police, all the volunteers that were there. And so, if you can switch to the next photo. So, we're, although this is dated for a year later, I wanted to share this photo. This is a famous photo. There are many famous photos from 9/11, but this happened the day after, the same day as our prayer service. So we went straight from D.C., Andrews Air Force Base, to New York City, straight down to Ground Zero, where he was visiting with volunteers and firemen and policemen. And at this point, it's only 3 days, so it's an active site where they're still looking for survivors. And it was a very emotional place to be with. It was still, fires were burning. But this famous photo, after President Bush was really just meeting everybody, and he could have stayed there for a couple of days in that spot. He would have, with all the volunteers and people. And this gentleman right here is a retired fireman. His name was Bob Beckwith. And Bob was down there. He was retired. He just went down to help his fellow firemen and just to be there. And he actually was standing on a crushed fire truck. That's the spot where he's standing, and just there in support. And happened to the president talk to him, and the president said, "I want you to stay here. I want you to be here in support." Of course, all the Secret Service were trying to move people around. And he said, "No, I want you to stay here." And while he was standing there, this fireman had that megaphone with him. And someone from the crowd, they were talking, but you couldn't hear him. And someone, the other fireman, said, "Mr. President, we can't hear you." And he grabs the megaphone, and he says, "I hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock down these buildings are going to hear from us all soon." Famous line from Mr. Beckwith and the megaphone. That was the tone. All this happened one day. And then, so we're, at this point forward, we're going back and forth to, I hate to water down the stories, but there's just so much that took place. So after that, as we're there with the president a couple days, come back to the White House, and we're really in this mode of, knowing we're preparing for an attack, we're preparing for war, we're attending as many Muslim churches and places that we can, reaching out to the communities and talking to people, and so we're planning. You can tell what the planning is happening, but from the advanced side, our world is really planning all these trips back to the various sites for recovery and just not to show that we're doing this, but really analyzing, helping with the recovery efforts. So October 7th, 2011, the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan begins with an air assault and a covert ops on the ground. So the war and retaliation begins. So this goes through the year, and from the advanced world, if you can go to the next thing. During this time, this is me, at least in the middle to the left. I don't know if I had less hair then or I just combed it different, but I'm trying to let it go. These are two of my advanced friends. He was, this gentleman on the left was Chief of Protocol at the State Department, and the gentleman on the right was one of our local, he's a lobbyist, but he was a volunteer that did a lot of local work for us. So President Karzai was invited, this is within that year, to be a guest of the President at his State of the Union address. And so he was he came to the White House for the day for meetings and then rode with us. Even when the President gave the State of the Union address, we were in charge of getting the President there, all the meetings, everything that happened along with that. So President Karzai was with us at the White House and came over. He was one of the President's guests to speak. And I remember when Sarah had invited me to give this remarks, I had a lot of artifacts. I hope you'll get a chance to come up later and see. I copied the address to the chamber before this. It's like a week after the attacks from the Capitol. The State of the Union speech was the next 2 years. This famous Axis of Evil speech from that time announcement. So we were, from our advance office, we were even in charge of President Karzai through the State Department. It was part of our role to take care of dignitaries. So as we move forward, if you go to the next scene, or next picture. A year later to the date, which would be September 11, 2002, we had planned throughout the year memorial services at the Pentagon, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the field, and not survivors, but the family members there, and then a visit back to New York City. In the morning at 8:43, this is on the south lawn of the White House. All the White House staff were on the south lawn to Prairie at exactly 8:43. And then we went to, from there, the President went to the Pentagon for a memorial service there on the site that was being rebuilt and recovered. Then we flew to Shanksville, Pennsylvania for a ceremony that afternoon. And then we went to New York City. Go to the next scene. This is ground zero a year later to the date. Basically, we just cleaned out all the fallen debris. And so we ended the day after all these other visits where in this picture, again, only the President's photographer had this photo. And we had the President and Mrs. Bush are walking down like a ramp that we had built, and then these are firemen and policemen on the side, and the circle of people in the end are family members of the victims. So we spent the rest of the afternoon with the family members, and from that day, and then further support. So very moving day, mentally for everybody involved and for the world to be. At this time, we were fully engaged in our war efforts at that time. From that day, from that event to 9/11, from airport security that changed, body screening, bag checks, events social media later came into play, but this, the event of 9/11 changed so many of our lives, how we work, live, travel, how the president travels, how security is handled, and how events are portrayed, and been able to still, to provide large events that you see on TV, not really knowing what all goes into it, all the security and planning that goes into it. It's just more work and more security. So, from the 9/11 story, we moved forward, and we continued to travel. We were probably more determined to travel and do what we felt like we needed to do more than ever. And I have some exhibits. I'm out of my thoughts at this point, so that's my story, my speech. But I do have some remnants and some photos and exhibits I would hope you to share. I received this gift on the left in George W. Bush's second term. They redesigned the Oval Office, and they stripped the floor, and they took pieces of the Oval Office floor and part of the special assistants and senior staff and VIPs received a piece of that with a picture of the Oval Office, which that was very special. And that is my story of 9/11. I have many others, but thank you for letting me share. I've never shared this story before, but I appreciate it, and I will be here for refreshments and conversation. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Ray, thank you so much, and let's give him another. That was fabulous. Goodness. We need to all get his autograph before he leaves. And we will be expecting at some point in time in your career for a book to document all that again. But we are just so appreciative of your being here and of your sharing such a fabulous time in your career. And isn't it wonderful that he's from Mississippi? Thank you so much. I know that you will want to speak to Mr. Ray, and also this is a fabulous exhibit as well. And remember, we'll be some of the first individuals to see these items because he has just brought them from his home. So to exhibit them here. So please see that exhibit. We also want to invite you, as Stephen said, for reception and to visit with Mr. Ray. And I believe that Sarah has a little gift for Mr. Ray. And let's thank Sarah for bringing Mr. Ray to me.
It's not a cowbell. We were tempted. Slowly convert.
Thank you very much.
Please join us and please come and visit with Mr. Ray. Thank you so much.